Welcome, everybody. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where we are placed, the Wurundjeri people of the Woi Wurrung language group. Pay our sincere respects to the elders of the past who held their culture, the elders of the present who strengthen their culture, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that we engage with, and welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the room with us today. I would like to introduce to you Sandra Schwarz. Sandra is from Human Naturescapes, and she had a long career in secondary teaching, but was drawn to garden design, which has inspired her to pivot her profession, combining experience and knowledge with her passion, gardening. Sandra's now has an international master's degree in landscape architecture with a specialisation in green roofs and walls. And Sandra's going to talk to us about the restorative benefits of garden, nature and horticulture therapy. So thanks so much for making the time for us, Sandra. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Let me see if I can share, because I may as well talk while this is on. Hold on. Of course, it's not working.
It's only when you're under pressure that it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Every other time it works fine.
It's not actually giving me the option of like another select tab. Sorry, bear with me. It's not.
That's okay.
It's not actually
Welcome,
giving
Catalin.
me the option of my presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Is it my team settings?
It's basically only letting me into the as if like I'm in the internet, whereas my presentation obviously is on my desktop. I'm sure you don't want, well, maybe I just need to share my screen. Let's try that. And then I'll open it. Can you see that?
Look, there we are.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
Okay, the only thing that's now a problem is that I can't see any of you.
I will give you a yell if anyone's got their hand up.
Perfect. Thank you so much. First of all, yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity to present what this topic is a book that I've just released in July called Restore: How Green Spaces Support Human Restoration. And as Sarah just did, I just want to recognise that I not only produced this book, but am sitting right now on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I think there's so much that we can learn about their custodianship of both land and waterways, and I certainly hope that we do that soon, as opposed to what we've just been seeing in the news. So a little bit, Sarah already mentioned this, so I'll be really brief. Combining my love of design and gardening, as she said, is what resulted in some overseas study in Sweden, in southern Sweden, and also here in Melbourne. I've since then been working as a landscape architect and helping at the University of Melbourne teaching therapeutic landscapes. And at the moment, I'm in the process of finishing off a Cert 4 in Allied Health Assistance and volunteering at the Royal Talbot Rehabilitation Centre in Kew. And that is about trying to move that little bit more into, I guess, therapeutic horticulture. But my interest within that is around the design of those spaces. So the master's thesis that I created for both of the courses that I did resulted in a literature review and then also some practical work. And from there, I really wanted to think about how to share my findings. And so 3 and a bit years later, it has resulted in this book, which is an independently published and print-on-demand book. Which is available at the website, which that QR code links you to. Should also be available to order at any bookstore. It may not be on the shelf, though, purely because it is a print-on-demand project, that means that it doesn't get printed until there's an order in many cases, unless I'm dropping it off on shelves. And what this book was trying to answer for me was looking at the concept of supportive environments. And so basically the work that I'm presuming most of you do within the various fields of, be that social work or dementia care, is how do I, as a landscape or garden designer, support that work through the way that I'm designing that space. And there's certainly certain things, elements, principles that we can use that really supports and enhances that work. And that's what I was trying to answer within my thesis. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about my findings. I will go pretty briefly through some of it, just because I'd like to spend more time on how it actually relates to dementia care, broadly speaking, because that isn't my speciality. I'm only just starting to get in there. And I guess one thing that I would say, when I was looking at the thesis of putting this together, I had initially wanted to focus on stress rehabilitation, cancer, and dementia, because I felt they were the three areas that had been researched the most, but soon found that the stress rehabilitation and cancer care, they had very similar needs, whereas some of the needs for people living with dementia felt quite different at the time. And so there wasn't a lot of overlap. And then I also, to be fair, couldn't actually find very many dementia gardens to visit so that I could put that in practice. So at the time, I put it to the side and didn't think that it was a universal thing. But since writing the book and sort of reinvestigating and resynthesizing the research that I did, I have found that they are universal design considerations. They just work on a spectrum. But one of the overriding findings, I guess, that's come out of the research is that there's a hierarchy or a priority of green space access. And the main thing that we're always trying to do is to actually get a user outside in the space, to literally and physically experience it. So it means that we're feeling the sun on our body, it's warming us, we're feeling the wind, maybe not today, but feeling the wind on our face. And we're interacting in a very sensual and full body way with that experience. And if that is able to be the case, then that's where the most amount of benefit will actually come from, regardless of what condition or, I guess, circumstance the user is finding themselves in. That's where the most benefit for restoration comes from, if you can get people to experience that space. If number one is not possible, which in many cases obviously is the case, the next best thing is to be able to view a green space. And again, we're talking about the physical actual space, so that that interaction with the seasonal and temporal changes can be experienced. So while we may not feel wind on our face, we can see that it's sunny, we can see a bird coming in, we can see the planting change over time. So that experience is still very beneficial. And it may also, in certain circumstances, entice somebody to go and experience it at that first level later on when possible. In certain healthcare situations, 1 and 2 may not be possible. You might be in a hospital with no windows or looking out over a city on the 13th floor or something like that, and it's not possible to actually see greenery at all. It is still, according to the research, beneficial to see landscapes, nature-based scenes, and that could be in the form of murals, photographs, posters, paintings, and then supported by indoor plants and flowers. But we are talking here not just about general art, although that can also be quite pleasant to have in the space, but the real benefit of restoration does come from what is recognisably a landscape or a natural scene, so something that we understand to be that. And I'll come back to sort of, you'll hear me talk about this priority as we go. So the findings from my research ended up at these 6, what I call universal design considerations. I haven't called them principles because of the fact that it's not a one size fits all. It's something that's on a spectrum, and it's something that really I'm asking anyone like Sarah, who I spoke to a few weeks ago when visiting Caledonia, or a designer like a landscape architect. I'm sort of tapping them on the shoulder and saying, have you thought about this? Have you considered this? how does this apply to your user? And I'll come back to the fact that it's on a spectrum a little bit later. So out of 10 considerations initially in my thesis, I then went over them again and realised that actually they're probably about 6 because certain ones went together. And that's what I'll talk about for the rest of this session, is to not only show you an example of what that might look like, but also then going back to further research that I've done literally for today and sort of where my natural research is going as well, as to how that links to dementia. In saying that, I realise that dementia is a very broad group of conditions. There's not going to be one size fits all there. So again, these considerations are about unpicking these things for particular users and what their needs are. So there's no you tick this box and you've done it. It's going to be about prompting questions or just opening, I guess, a conversation around what kinds of things need to be thought about with any particular user. And this, just by the way, is available free for download on my website as well, in this format. And then there's a second part in the PDF that has like some prompts and questions that might be useful if thinking about redesigning a space. So the first one is choice. Now I'm going to run through this first bit relatively quickly because, as I said, I'd rather talk about an example and then also relate it back to dementia care and what I found around that so far. But choice is about the control of personal access to a space. So how, when, where do I use the space? What do I use it for? And is that within my control? In quite a few cases that I've researched, it was conditions where you kind of start to lose a bit of control because medical staff might be taking over how your day runs. And so this level of personal control is really important. And it also suits your capacity. So however you're feeling, if you're feeling tired that day, your personal choice of how and when to use a space suits that, which makes it compatible to you and the situation that you're in. It means that on any given day, hour, week, you have a choice between social and private areas and whether to actually engage in that way. And then there's also options within that choice, like within the layout of a particular garden space. So it could be seating options, path options, and quite a lot of the gardens I looked at had separate rooms so that you could choose different spaces to go into. And quite a lot of the information that I'm sort of referencing at the moment came from Alzheimer's WA in their enabling environments design advice. And they also mentioned the fact that, which links to the rooms, that these spaces are a little bit smaller. So they're trying to contrast the institutional feeling of things. So this is just one example that's in the book. This is one of 8 existing Horatio's gardens, this one in London, designed by Tom Stewart Smith. And these are I guess the point of the charity is to create 11 healing or therapeutic gardens, Horatio's gardens, for the spinal injury units that exist in the UK. So as said, they've completed 8, 9 is about to start, so they don't have very far to go to get all of them done. And it was a charity started by a young man who tragically lost his life. His parents worked at one of the hospitals, and so when he passed away, they decided that they would make the wish that he had to create these gardens for patients a reality. And where this particular example, and this is fairly, the things I'm going to talk about are pretty common for all of the Horatio's gardens, so it's not just this one. It's part of the design brief. They are high maintenance gardens that have a head gardener and an assistant at each of them. But where this garden is really good at providing choice, and it's basically about choice of access in the sense that they're making it very easy for patients to access the space. So one is that you can see instantly that that pathway is quite wide. So spinal injury, we're talking patients visiting either in a wheelchair, potentially with a walking aid, potentially walking, but also quite a lot of patients come into these spaces in hospital beds. And one of the things that really supports that is on the right-hand side of that silver birch in the middle there, you'll see that there's a post with a little grey box. That's a power point where a patient bed can actually be plugged in to keep the air mattress that is being given to those patients for extra support for their spinal injury, keep that inflated. And if that wasn't there, those patients already would have a much harder time, if at all, being able to visit this space. Another part that has been applied to all of the gardens is the ground surface. So all of the surfaces, because they're retrofits to existing hospitals, they can make sure that their ground is quite flat, but what they want to avoid is any kind of bump. So even where that colour transition happens, there's no edging on that, so that as you wheel over it with the bed or the wheelchair, that you would have a bump that would cause pain to a patient. It's also made with a resin-bounded gravel so that it is permeable, so water can actually filter away and not collect. So again, makes it much more accessible for someone in a wheelchair to not have to worry about puddles. You can see also that that particular surface, because it's permeable, is able to go right up to the actual edge of the tree, which means that you can get both a wheelchair and a bed right up to that, and they can feel the texture of the bark or pick a leaf if they choose, etc. So again, it's about providing that real ease of access through the space. And then the final thing I want to mention, and again, this is across the board, these pods that you can see, the little building in the background, those pods are being integrated into pretty much every design in different forms. And what is special about those is that has like a corner door that's 2 glass doors. They open automatically as you approach. So there's nothing that you have to press. Makes it much easier for staff that are wheeling a bed out there, because they don't have to worry about the door. Makes it easy for someone in a wheelchair. Those spaces are also heated to 23 degrees. So they provide the shelter, but they're heated because quite a few people with spinal injury will lose capacity to regulate their body temperature. So they're nice and warm. And then the windows that you can see there that are the bright colours go out the side, but each of these pods, no matter what format it comes in, also has a skylight, so that somebody being wheeled into that space with a bed will also have a view out from above. So with those different things, this space has really provided the choice for patients to either take themselves into that space and have that be very easy, or have it be really easy and accessible as a choice to spend time in that space by staff being able to wheel somebody out into it. But now to have a look at how does this play out in terms of someone living with dementia. So in terms of control of personal space or personal access to a space, we're trying to create a space that feels comfortable and actually gives someone the confidence to be able, and that they feel comfortable to actually go and be in that space. So things like automatic doors, a transition of light, so that you're not going from indoor to outdoor and having this really blunt transition of, you know, it's dark inside and it's light outside. It's actually quite a smooth transition. And then also not necessarily surface material, but surface colour, that is consistent between indoors and outdoors as you transition out, so that anyone that does have a visual impact from their dementia, that they're not thinking that it's a different level. That we have clear sight lines so that they can understand the space and feel confident in going out. They can start to understand the space, and that it's also a very level surface, so that there's no falls, well, less falls risk, and I guess less confidence being knocked by that. In terms of capacity, it basically allows, if you have those transitions and a visible view of the garden from inside, you're allowing that capacity choice to say, look, today I don't quite feel up to it, but I still want to see the garden. So it might be that somebody goes and sits in the threshold between indoor and outdoor. They may sit at the window and enjoy the view, but it also entices people out to actually experience it, because perhaps there's a bird's nest that is just visible but not clearly visible from inside, and it's enticing them out to go and have a look at that. So it lets them choose, how am I accessing that space? It allows that choice of being active or busy, but also the potential for passive engagement or more quiet engagement within. And that goes back to the capacity about someone choosing to be at a threshold or look at the view, or actually actively go out and be in the space. And in the case of dementia especially, we're talking about paths and furniture, making it possible and accessible, much in the way that I just talked about with Horatio's garden, so that we have seats with armrests that just make it instantly possible for someone to know that they can push themselves off. So that's not a barrier, that the paths are legible, and usually with dementia gardens they are circuits, just so that for that orientation factor, that we have visible rest points, and also things like table heights are varied to become potentially active. So you may have some tables that are planted where a wheelchair can slide under them quite comfortably, or you may have some even taller ones where someone can stand. But certainly, as per Horatio's garden, that things are planted and set at a level where whoever is coming into that space has a choice of areas that they can actually actively engage with. The second consideration then is verdant, or about green, and what this really just means is that these really are green spaces. Now, I say green spaces instead of gardens purely because in the book I looked at some open public green spaces, backyards, healthcare gardens, but not all spaces were what we would traditionally call a garden, so hence why I use the term green space. But we are talking about a 70 to 30 ratio of plants to hardscape. So it's definitely, nobody would disagree if we called it a green space, is the type of space that we're talking about. That's about creating habitat, letting us see life cycle, and also having that connection between indoors and outdoors that we've already spoken about. And that is that second priority in actual green space access. This is the Maggie's Cancer Care Centre, which is a chain now. I think there's over 25, I think, of Maggie's Cancer Care Centres throughout the UK, and some are starting to go elsewhere in the world, like Spain and Japan. And this particular site is a bit like an angular donut. So this is the courtyard that's on the inside of the space. So it means that despite the fact that Glasgow, which is not known for its balmy conditions, so you might not necessarily want to be in the space at all times, that whole entire building, I think there's only a very small bit of wall that you can't access that view from. And so it is visible at all times of the year and from all parts of the building. And then this is some of the outer part of that sort of donut type building. And you'll see that this is where the sort of orange lines are, that it's actually quite a small corridor, but because it has glass all on one side and then mirror all on the other side, it's taken quite a small space and brought that nature in. And again, we're protected from the elements, so it's about viewing but engaging with that dynamic landscape. But it's a way of taking a very small space and just opening that right up. And at this time of year, and I have to admit, I've only been there at sort of around summer, late summer, both times that I visited, but you're just completely immersed, and it feels like walking into a green hall instead of a hallway. And both the orange seat that's there and where I was standing to take the photo has another seating unit. It has those slight, I guess, not visually private, but still private places to sit and enjoy that space and bring that greenery in. And even in winter, I think when this would have no canopy, it would still be quite a restful site to view because the understory would still be quite green. So again, to relate this to people living with dementia, one of the things spoken about by the Alzheimer's WA resource that I had a look at was talking about more probably internally with the building, but softening acoustics so that the clarity of noise, like instead of having background conversation in a cafe or things like that, that was quite useful. And certainly plants do that in the outdoors. They soften the acoustics, and then really the sounds that you're hearing are positive and preferred sounds from any cohort. The plants generally also tend to trigger or cue memory. And then if you have raised beds, you've got an opportunity to start really engaging the sensory experience by having edible plants and certainly smells, but certainly particularly with an aged cohort, we want to avoid thorns and irritants. We're creating habitat. So again, those positive natural sounds, which across the board are preferred compared to urban sounds like cars and air conditioners, etc. And if we can bring in wildlife, or as was suggested by Alzheimer's WA, they talked about having perhaps chickens or an aviary as well, which I have to say I haven't seen as yet. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But it gives opportunities to actually give care and have some responsibility, and I guess that meaningful engagement of habitat that is around us. And again, it prompts memories. And then life cycle of that garden, that dynamic space that it is, provides temporal orientation. So it gives an idea of not only daytime, nighttime, but also the seasons. It lets you watch the process of a plant that's flowering, and obviously engage, as we were just talking before we started, about the wind and things like that. So weather elements that come in and affect us. And not all of these things are always going to be positive. Like today, you may not want to be out in that wind, but the fact that you're experiencing it is quite invigorating, and it certainly gives you a different type of experience to what we feel when we're inside. And then that connection between indoors, outdoors, that was the second priority within accessing green space in terms of getting that restorative benefit. It's a good option for those that might be hesitant about going outside. It's that temporal connection again. And from what I understand so far, and I was just listening to a podcast from Dementia Australia, I think it's Hold the Moment, which was talking about the sleep challenges that some people with dementia might have, and that sundowner effect. And from what I was listening to, I feel like that this connection to sunlight and vitamin D and daylight, and getting those rhythms from, or rhythmic cues, temporal cues from daylight would certainly help with the circadian rhythms and helping with that effect. So then we have spatiality, and this is the idea that probably all of us are feeling right now. We're quite aware of where the walls are in the room, that we have a ceiling above our heads, that we're probably closer to the floor than we are the ceiling, etc. We're thinking about the people that we're surrounded by. So we have a sense of the human scale, or us, within a space, and that's really what spatiality is our awareness of what's going on around us. And the important things here is that something about that space is legible, that we can read it, we can understand it, we have some kind of reference for it. And there's a theory that particularly underpins this, which is prospect and refuge, which goes back to an evolutionary theory. And the easiest way to explain it is to think of a caveman who has the refuge of the cave behind him, but he can look out to see the prospect of what's in front of him, and he can see if there's a predator or a bushfire or something like that coming, and then has the choice to actually make about, what does he do? Does he go back into the cave and stay safe there, or does he actually move elsewhere? And that feeling of refuge and potentially full enclosure can be both perceived and actual safety, and I'll come back to that in just a second. And as in the case here of this picture of the Royal Talbot Rehabilitation Centre, you can see here this isn't a highly manicured space. It's about casual maintenance, and what that allows people is to, I guess, be given permission to be casual themselves. And that can often be quite domestic as well. So to bring it down to a human scale and a domestic atmosphere, which I think relates particularly to both dementia and cancer care, in that the Maggie Centres actually have it as part of their brief that they are specifically trying to contrast the institutional feeling of the hospitals that they're connected to. And I certainly find that that's much of the discussion around dementia gardens or dementia-friendly spaces as well. And then this is just another example of spatiality in that I find this interesting about how we personally can actually change how we experience a space. This is the Voorlinden Museum Garden in the Netherlands. You can see the museum there on the right. And certainly, as much of the Netherlands, it's a very flat landscape that's been planted and designed by Piet Oudolf, who's quite a well-known Dutch plantsman. And because it's flat, when you're actually standing and looking over the space, you're not only oriented according to the museum and where you are in reference to it, but you actually walk around this garden and can kind of see over and into it a little bit like what the photo shows. So you're seeing the layout, you're seeing that there's these lawn circles in different spots. You can see whether they're occupied or not. You have quite a good overview or legible kind of layout and plan of that space. But once you go into these spaces, what most people would do is they actually, rather than walking around and being upright, they actually sit down or they lie down, and they might sit and have a picnic in those spaces. And just by bringing down our height, and for myself, I'm 5'4", so I'm not, particularly tall, but it's still that change in height that all of a sudden you now can't see over the plants, you can't see the layout anymore. You've gone from the macro to the micro because you're now eye to eye with the plants around you. And so that brings your attention to things like a butterfly coming in or a bumblebee flying past. And it completely changes how you are in that space because you've lowered your view and you're now much more surrounded or enclosed by the planting as well. So it's a very easy and effective way to actually change someone's experience of spatiality just by either raising them up or lowering them down within the topography. And then to, again, link it back to dementia, legible really means well-defined paths. In most cases, this means having dark edges and very defined edges and perhaps a lighter material for the actual path. Having signs and landmarks that show you that way around the circuit. And some circuits are a little bit more complex than others, depending on, I guess, what kind of cohort or what phase of dementia they're dealing with. Having sight lines and windows, so having a very clear way of sort of entering the space. So usually, I guess, a path to enhance a little bit of mystery will have a bit of a curve wandering off. Because even though there's something more to explore down there, that's something that you might pull back on a little bit within a dementia-friendly garden from the point of view of that mystery might be a little bit daunting compared to exciting to somebody else. So we're looking more for familiar cues of still perhaps having a curve, but less of a curve, or if you're going around the curve, there's actually a landmark popping out so that you can orientate and go, oh, no, I remember being there before. I know I need to get to the gazebo or whatever that marker may be. In terms of refuge and enclosure, so again, it's about creating a familiar domestic atmosphere, making sure that entrances are well defined. Obviously, I don't need to explain to all of you that you can also hide doorways so that they're not being used as much, but also in certain cases using unobtrusive fencing. So making sure that the space is technically enclosed. And that's obviously about that actual safety. And the same need was actually expressed in a garden in Copenhagen where it was a space that was in an arboretum. So there were people of the public walking past, and a cohort that was having their treatment there for PTSD really wanted that. No, we want the gate closed. We don't want to be able to be seen by others, of that feeling of safety. in there as well. So depending on what your cohort is like and which stage they're at, fencing is certainly a good option, but in most cases I would suggest being unobtrusive, because some previous reading I've done did talk about people feeling trapped or locked in, which we don't want. We're trying to create a restorative space. The casual maintenance, then again, it's about that domestic familiar scale and appearance. If you, just generally speaking, if you have quite a manicured garden that, you know, has very straight lines or feels very defined, and I guess geometric, we're talking about potentially feeling like, oh yeah, I know I'm not allowed to sit on that grass because it's too perfect, and I know I'm not meant to touch this, and all I'm meant to do is walk down this. Whereas the casual maintenance that has a domestic feel is much more welcoming and much more allowing you to have that same casual approach. But in saying that, certainly within people living with dementia, we want to maintain those clear sight lines, either of paths or some form of layout, or also having, again, that landmark be very clear and visible, but it doesn't need to be particularly formal. And really within that domestic feeling, we're talking about being familiar and homely. There's a few gardens I've seen recently that will have things like, well, particularly have sheds, so to have tools, making sure that they're on display and easily visually as well as physically accessible, so that people can go back to those day-to-day activities that they might have done previously. Having that homely feel of having a clothesline with just some tea towels hanging on it, that kind of thing. So really bringing in elements that make it feel like, yep, this, I can relate to this. I remember doing this at home. And then also having particular plant species that you might choose that particularly interact or are meaningful to that cohort that you're dealing with. So I know that at Caladinia, there's some roses that are quite meaningful to people that are there, but it might also be an Italian cohort where you're looking at vegetables like tomatoes and basil, etc. So it's, again, really starting to pinpoint who is your cohort, what do they need, what do they want, making them part of it. And certainly within my book, some of the research that I did was by a garden designer in Germany who specialises in aged care and dementia gardens, and her whole process is all about including and involving the residents and the people that are coming there to make sure that it's being really targeted at what is familiar for you, what do you want to see here. We then have comfort. So this is the provision of sun and shade, so having those two options, resting options as well, so that might be formal furniture like we see here in a Copenhagen example, but it could also be raised garden beds or walls that just resting options in terms of leaning against, but also then resting options like having handrails, things like that. And in the case of, I guess, other cohorts, we're also talking about having opportunities to stretch your legs, so not just chairs. Natural materials are preferred across the board, so instead of concrete and steel, we're talking about timber, rock, so it's not necessarily a soft material, but certainly something that we understand is natural. Gravel, things like that, and then obviously going back to verdant, that planting, having those natural materials. Providing seasonal shelter, like you can see here with the shade sails. So making sure that we're really elongating the use of that garden space. And then signs of care. And signs of care is something that within horticulture, I guess, we would talk about going a little bit beyond what is common within, unfortunately, the budgets, and also various other reasons within, for example, council maintenance with the mow and blow, where they come through and they would do more what I would call evidence of presence. So I can see through the mown lawn that they've been there, but I wouldn't necessarily call that it's a sign of care. So in the case of this example of the Healing Forest Garden, Nicadia in Copenhagen, we can see there a fire has already been set. I think the fact that the seating is in a circle, and you can see the red blanket that's on one of the seats there. That shows you that there's an extra element of care coming into that space. This is the space where each of the cohorts that come through there for their therapy start and finish the day. And that's where you have the hot drinks. You can roast your marshmallows. It's a private, quite enclosed refuge of a nook to have those conversations. And that's that next level of care that I'm talking about. So then, as an example of this, we're looking at one of, I think, 12 gardens, part of Legacy Health in Portland, Oregon, who are doing quite a lot with hospital gardens. And here again, in terms of comfort, and I think you will have noted already that what I'm talking about with comfort is generally physical comfort. But if we can provide physical comfort, then we're also going to start providing emotional or I guess psychological comfort. So here again, we have timber being used both for seating and for the steps that are running up. I'm not 100% sure about how cold those metal handrails would be to touch, but certainly as a tactile element, they would seem quite nice. In the case of the seat straight ahead with the concrete base and the blue around it where there's the little sign, you could lean up against that and stretch your legs out. So you have options for, you know, where you'd like to sit and how you'd like to sit. Armrests, no armrests. We have the sun protection at the back. So again, we have choice of, do I sit in shade? Do I sit in the sun? Where would I like to be? All of these being about a comfortable use of that space. And roughly where the photographer is standing, there's a ramp coming up behind that, as well as the option of the stairs. So again, this is where a lot of these considerations actually start to merge. We're offering choice, but we're doing it in a comfortable way. So if somebody is struggling to use the steps, then they have an option or a choice to actually use a more comfortable version of walking, which is to go up the ramp. So by providing those, we give plenty of choice and plenty of comfort within the space. Relating back again to dementia-friendly spaces or enabling environments, that sun and shade is about natural light and vitamin D, so supporting those circadian rhythms, but also temperature sensitivity within certain dementia conditions. So looking at being able to get that balance, and again, merging with choice to say, how are you feeling right now? Which one do you need? You've got a choice of where you do that and can actually regulate that yourself independently. Those resting options, it's important, particularly as we move into dementia that's connected to aged care, looking at the fact that the next resting spot is visible, and it shouldn't be further than 20-25 metres away. But either way, it should be visible, and that's about making that choice of, yep, I can see the next stop. Yes, I can do this. This is an accessible space for me. Resting options are both about walking and sitting. So it's also about having handrails or hand rests. So it might be a formal handrail, but it might also be a raised wall. And that can be both an informal seat as well as something just to rest against. But with any of this, it's about being comfortable. So particularly within dementia care, rather than public open space, for example, I would say that there's much more option to actually have cushions and things like that as well. The natural materials, as I said, this is preferred across the board. It doesn't matter what age or what cohort or what demographic we're talking about. But in the case of dementia, it would certainly be supporting that temperature sensitivity, in that timber doesn't heat up as much. It has a much more domestic feel, and also, I guess, allows for those more subtle patterns rather than, say, paving, for example, and creating some really contrasty pattern, and then that will cause anxiety because of it looking like it has different levels. So it certainly allows that to be pulled back in a much more natural and easy way. Seasonal shelter and having those windows to a green space allows that daylight access. So again, for that circadian rhythm, it can be things like a gazebo that was particularly mentioned by Alzheimer's WA. Doesn't need to be a gazebo, though. It could be like a winter garden or something like that. And again, it's about making sure that as much as possible we're enhancing and supporting that temporal connection. And then, as I said, signs of care. What I've read about quite a bit recently are the memory boxes that are often placed at the front of people's rooms to let them wayfind, but also obviously as prompts for remembering certain aspects of their lives, and to being able to do that in a garden space as well. So whether it be that certain users personalize the space literally to have perhaps a particular cushion that they bring into the space. It might be that they help choose colors, that objects are painted. It would be objects that are in there, as said, like garden tools in a little shed, being visibly accessible and basically taking them back to that normal life, and prompting memory as to, oh yeah, this, yep, I remember what a watering can is for. Yep, I'll water the plants. But it's that next level of care, like making sure that those objects and opportunities for personalizing are in the space, that takes it to signs of care rather than just pure maintenance. I think the second last one. So this is a stroll garden in Kyoto in Japan, which I must say aren't particularly accessible to a lot of people, but certainly has some interesting ideas around how we curate and create a walking experience through a space, which I'll come back to. So movement within the research in terms of being restorative is predominantly about walking. It's a gentle exercise. It's something that's free. You can do it at whatever capacity and speed you're capable of. So very easy to adapt. Within that, obviously, we do want to have wheeled access. These types of gardens came about during a period of history where I guess there just were less wheelchairs and thoughts about that. But certainly today we want to make sure that we're including wheeled access for both wheelchairs, but also things like prams. And I'll come back to these two, but generally speaking, within the research, which I guess is not looking at predominantly wheeled or any kind of challenge of mobility, the research was showing that surfaces that slow us down and kind of bring us to a more mindful way of actually moving through a space is very helpful. And also having two escape routes. So, and this predominantly came from stress rehabilitation gardens where people at the beginning of their treatment, when they were particularly stressed and still quite chronic after a breakdown, would not be capable of talking or interacting with another person. And so having two escape routes was really helpful for them. And in the case of the garden where I studied in Sweden, it was enhanced by the fact that there were hedges, so garden rooms that were hedged, and on the other side were gravel paths, that would allow you to hear when somebody was approaching, so that you could then make the choice of, okay, they're about to come to that entrance. I can't do this. I need to leave the space, and it allowed that choice to happen. And so this is one of the stroll gardens also in Kyoto called Okochi Sanso. And I just wanted to talk about, because I think as a way of thinking about how can we curate or prompt a journey through a garden, it's a very interesting way to maybe take some of those elements and bring them into garden design. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that there's quite a flat kind of usual path, a little bit of a rock there as well. But then as you come into that little lined section with the steppers, you are coming into an area where, one, it's single file. So even if you're visiting with another person, you now need to walk behind each other, which is less conducive to conversation. So it's much more about having that kind of individual mindful experience. The fact that those steppers are quite raised, so they're a good sort of 10 centimetres high, which means, I mean, they're not, I guess for someone with mobility issues, they could be dangerous. Generally speaking, if you're mobile, that's not going to be as much of an issue. But what it does do is make you focus on where you're walking. So you're automatically going to turn your eyes down. This particular part of the garden is a moss garden, so they're directing your visual attention down at your feet, which is also where the actual part that they want you to focus on in the garden is. So by watching where you're walking and concentrating, you're also looking at the plants that they want you to look at. And then once you've got to the other end of that path, it opens up again to a flatter paving, and there's a tea house there. And so your gaze automatically comes up and starts to take that in, and perhaps at that point turn around and then take in the whole landscape. So it's quite an interesting way about how to almost force, I guess, but I would say curate an experience of how we kind of prompt somebody to use a particular space. So for dementia-friendly gardens, physical activity of walking is obviously the ideal. It's the most compatible version of actually moving through a space and being physically active. There's a lot of research out there at the moment about just how useful walking is for anybody. And as I say, it's that very compatible kind of type of gentle exercise. For wheeled access, we want to aim for paths that are wide, like that Horatio's garden example. We should be aiming for about 180 centimetres wide, so that two people in wheelchairs can actually pass or move together through it. And that's sort of a ballpark that we're aiming for. And then, as I sort of preempted, I'm not 100. I think that these are the last two aspects that are maybe not quite as suited to dementia conditions or people living with dementia. They're certainly not specifically noted for any dementia research that I've seen so far. Doesn't mean it's not out there. But what I would say in terms of surfaces and slowing down, within a dementia-friendly garden, we're probably looking more at being fascinated and mindful around the surroundings rather than the surface. And it's more important within the surface for people living with dementia that it's a non-slip, non-glare, and that continuation of colour. We are trying to fascinate or distract them in a certain way, and that's where the slowing down comes in. But that second one as well is not specifically noted for dementia, but certainly may apply to conditions and where people are feeling distressed. Because really what it comes back to is giving people choice to either stay or leave the space, depending on who else is coming in there. And then this is the last one, so just bear with me. We've got fascination and distraction, the sensual or fascinating element of water. Water provides soundscape. I'll go into colour in just a second. And then memory is often brought about by sensual experiences as well. The picture you're looking at is the sensory garden at the Botanic Gardens in Melbourne. I am quite conscious of using the word sensual instead of sensory, and anyone that's spoken to me about this knows that I have a bit of a bugbear about it, and it's purely because I would challenge anyone to tell me that they've been to a garden that's not sensory. So I think when we say sensory garden, we need to be a little bit careful about it being quite a trendy kind of superficial thing, and that we need to dig a little bit deeper about what does that actually mean and what can it bring to our experiences. And the example here is the recreation of a cloister garden at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And what I'm wanting to get back to with this example is that really tactile and physical and very sensual experience that cloister gardens in particular had about them. So when they were active in the Middle Ages, it was very much about being places of respite and healthcare. But it was also because some of that was happening through the productive and the processing use of plants as medicinal plants. And even if you just look at the little borders that are around these garden beds, they've been woven by hand. So I guess one of the things that I find a little sad and sort of, is that things like the Industrial Revolution and just the technology that we're starting to work with has really separated us quite a lot without even going into the issue of daily screens. It's really separated us from that tactile physical experience with and of plants and of our environment. And I think going back to some of that, so whether it be as little as having a pot of mint on, you know, on your front veranda and you pick that and make yourself a cup of tea every day, it's that kind of sensual interaction with plants that can be really important. And so in terms of dementia-friendly spaces, then that fascination and distraction that kind of gets us out of our heads and out of rumination and worrying, that's very much made up of landmarks for orientation within a dementia-type garden, looking at not only things like the gazebo, but it could be that you can see the raised beds, or that there's certain colours that are consistently used for furniture, etc., which lets you realise, oh, yep, that's coming up, and so you can be distracted from other things. Making sure that plant beds are within easy reach of both paths and seats, so that engagement, as I mentioned earlier with the Horatios, because that paving goes all the way up to the edge of that tree because it's permeable, means that you can actually touch that tree. And the same with, you know, plants that are edible or smell, because a lot of plants, especially in terms of smell, they'll release their fragrance when brushing past, or if you're not close enough to actually brush past, then you can't have that kind of engagement. And it means that the engagement people have with plants is much more meaningful, I think, whether it be harvesting or smelling, but really, as with the close to garden, getting up close and personal. Water is a feature that is just across the board, doesn't matter who the cohort is fascinating for people. It's the sound, it's the reflections, it's the wildlife that brings in, so it's habitat provision, but that's just across the board in the research has been shown to be fascinating, and there's no difference with that in terms of the dementia research, where it's often things like bird baths and things like that. That obviously then contributes to the soundscape. So nature sounds, again, across the board, are far more restorative than urban sounds, so they're calming. I think some of these sounds, especially because we have moved away from interacting with nature, they can really trigger memory because people remember when they heard certain birds as a child, etc. And then in a minor way, it's also thinking carefully about where you might locate your air conditioning and things like that, so you actually remove or are able to counter those man-made sounds. In terms of colour, there's much more research around interior design of what the kind of feelings that people get from colour, not so much in garden design. And I was just reading a new book where Kathy Willis from the UK is trying to really unpick that and how we feel. And I was a bit like, whew, okay, I didn't miss anything, because she didn't find anything either in terms of research being out there that really specifically looks at the restorative effect of colour. So the main thing across the board that is evident both with people living with dementia but general population as well, so obviously this just stays the same across our lifetime, is that cool colours such as blues, purples, and in terms of flowers also some pinks and whites are very calming. And then warm colours like yellow, orange, red are a little bit more enlivening. And that also colours can be used for visual highlights. So it might be that you use it to highlight as the gazebo or seating or things like that, so that you have these pops of colour that actually help with orientation. And the only one thing that I found interesting within the research I did just recently was that there's potential for the distinction between blues with certain dementia variants, I guess, to not be as clear. So I'm not quite sure whether that distinction is between blues or whether the distinction is that they can't distinguish blues in themselves. So potentially with planting, you may want to lean more into the purples and pinks and the whites in case those blues are not as easy to distinguish. However, in terms of green, green is just the most calming colour of the lot, regardless of what kind of cohort we're talking about. And then The final one there is that the sensual experience, smell in particular, because where we process it in our brains is actually very close to where we also process memory. So those two seem very close connected, but also taste. So using that as prompts for memory, having edible plants, obviously making sure within dementia gardens that you're not having toxic or poisonous plants, but also bringing it back to that domestic feel, and particularly that edible kind of quality can really be enhanced in this type of garden. And so just summing up, I said at the beginning that these are gradients, that the considerations, there's no one size fits all. And as you'll see, that top one there for choice, that bar that runs across, I hope that you can see that where dementia gardens kind of sit. And I have to say this is quite a dynamic chart, I guess, because this is where I place things based on my understanding at the time that I wrote the book. As I delve now further into dementia and other conditions, my understanding and I guess my opinion is starting to change somewhat as well. But the best example here is that if I was designing a space for children, for example, I would have a really great diversity of spaces. It would be predominantly social. I would have loads of choice about where they go, how they go over, under, around, how they climb and go through the space, versus if I'm designing a garden for people living with dementia, it's going to be pulling that back a little bit. Not about providing no choice, because we still want to provide that. We just want to provide it in a way that is conducive and compatible with what they actually need, so that we're not causing anxiety or stress because we're providing too much choice. It's actually saying, all right, well, what level and what type of choice is actually more appropriate here? So that's where they sit on a slightly different scale. So thank you so much for your time and attention, and I might stop sharing because then we can do questions, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Sandra. That was absolutely fascinating. I love the pictures of all the different gardens that you visited. Amazing, and so different to each other.
Yes, yeah, and that was actually part of, I guess, the aim behind the book when I was asking people. And as I say, if there's anybody here that knows of a good dementia garden, please let me know, because they are quite hard to find. Just in the sense of, I guess, being shared. And what I put that down to is I call it the head down, bottom up, in that people are just so busy with what they're doing that they don't then necessarily share those garden spaces that really work well with others just because they're getting on with their jobs, which is, great and fine, but it would be fantastic to share them as well. But the aim behind the book, as I said, when I was asking people for suggestions, they would always say to me, oh, so you're looking for a therapeutic or a hospital garden? And I said, no, I'm looking for a space that when you walk in, you go, I feel better for being here. And that's really what it was after. And that can happen. Like, I was surprised that it included the High Line, which is a linear park, public park in New York. But it can be your backyard, it can be an open public space, it can be a hospital garden, it can be anything at all. You're just trying to bring those qualities in.
We've gone over time.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Did anyone have any burning questions?
Lucy.
Yes, Lucy.
Yeah, not a burning question. So thank you very much, Sandra. That was amazing. Just it's really good to hear. And my first question was going to be, do you know of any gardens we can access? So the only one I'm aware of is the one in Ballarat, and I think we've discussed it in this group before. I've not been, and honestly, it is far too far away for us to take our clients to.
About the walking trail up there?
Yeah, apparently, and I think it's gravel, but the paths are quite wide, so you can have two people walking along and wheelchairs and all that kind of thing. But it's too far away for us to take clients on a day trip, for example. So I'm just and we know how much we appreciate the value of that. So we'll also
I have
be
been up there. Look, I think it's a great thing to have, in the sense that it's starting the ball rolling, and then it can be used as an example for other people to follow and try. I think it's interesting that it has been done as really a public open space, because it's Parks Victoria that runs that. I have to say, from the little, as I say, dementia is not my specialty area in terms of this. It has been more broad. But one of the things that certainly came up for me was that visual challenge of having shadows, because that space, you're out in a forest, you are getting that forest, those shadows. So I do wonder how that would impact someone if they were challenges that they were having, because those shadows, certainly in summer, are really distinct. And I would wonder whether, because it's gum leaves and things like that, if it was moving in the wind, like, to me, that looks like snakes, let alone to someone who is not, cognitively taking it in that way. So I do wonder about that, but certainly it's the best that they can do with, being out in nature and not being able to control all those aspects. They are very wide paths, so they're great for that. Some of it is gravel and some of it is actually concrete. So it's definitely suitable for wheeled access for a lot of it. So, but yes, no, I'm still on the search. I guess the one area, the Royal Talbot Rehab Centre Garden, where I volunteer, they do have an aged care area, which has some courtyards in it. And certainly those people, the acquired brain injury unit that I do the garden in is next door, and so they can come out and use that space. So, but yeah, that's essentially, in terms of a dementia garden, that's actually about it. I'm still hunting, and I will keep hunting, but I'm not sure. That's why I guess I'm so excited about Sarah potentially giving the opportunity to enhance theirs, because I think there's not enough, and I think also because there's very few designers that I'm aware of that are specialising in this. There's not much that gets spruiked in terms of sharing it. So
Lisa.
Yes, hi. Thanks so much, Sandra. I know we're running short of time, Sarah. I'm just wanted to be quick. It was actually very interesting that you shared that, because I've just come back from a conference, and I'm a dementia doula, and one of the activities that we had to put together was, with 4 of us, was to make some sort of garden that was going to be dementia friendly, but we had the benefit of utilising the information from one of our doulas one of our educators who has worked with the 4-year-olds and dementia patients. Yeah, so Annika has done a bit of work with them, but so she actually gave us that activity. So it was actually really interesting, all of those things that you were talking about. Like, I've written so many notes, but it was almost like, I'm seeing so much more visual now of what you're saying, because we put it on paper, but what we did was we actually incorporated it with, there was I think they were in WA and they moved, but it was called the Herd. They incorporated kindergarten with an aged care facility. Yep. So we were actually doing a cafe with a kindergarten and an aged care facility. It was an incredible exercise, but I love what you shared, because a lot of that was the ideas that we were talking about for our clients. So
that's awesome.
Thank you.
And the resource that Alzheimer's WA had, they also mentioned that they didn't say necessarily integrate childcare, but one of the passive activity or engagements that they talked about was making sure that you put seating so that if there was childcare nearby, that they could watch. Mm-hmm. So I think, that's definitely one of the keys in terms of, just, you guys all know this, that it's about keeping things as normal as possible, and normal days that we interact with other generations.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Catalin.
Yes, thank you very much, Sarah, for your presentation. It was very, very interesting because I'm working on an older adult in Melbourne. It's a psychiatry unit, and we have a brand new area. And we also have an outdoor garden. We have an indoor garden, and we also have an outdoor garden. We only have walls, 2 seats, and it's brand new, and some floorboards. But on the sides of the wall, we have like a space where we can actually plant something. So any suggestion, any advice would be mostly appreciated for our clients.
Sure. Yeah, look, there's a few things out there. I'm happy to share some resources with Sarah that are out there. So one, I'm happy to share what I downloaded from the website from that Alzheimer's WA site, because I just, instead of having to go to all the different links, I just put it into one document. So I'm happy to share that. There's also a document called Gardens That Care, which I'll attach to Sarah as well. In terms of like plant choices, a lot of it would be, I would suggest, is talking to and maybe doing it as an activity with the residents or the users, of getting them to prompt, what do you want to see? What do you want to, what are your memories of plants? That's what you plant. So that there's already that connection to it. Obviously, you need to plant them within knowing that if it's a shade-loving plant, that you don't put it in bright sunlight and vice versa. But I think that would be, for me, the starting point, is having that discussion so that they're already in. They want it, and maybe they can help plant it. And then it's about visiting my plant and that sort of thing. And then the other thing that just popped up from the advice from Alzheimer's WA was just looking at lists that are about what are poisonous plants and plants that can cause allergies, so trying to avoid those. So euphorbia, for example, is one that I would potentially avoid, just because if you do break that off, it does have a sap that can give an allergic reaction, things like that. But those kinds of lists are actually really readily available because kids' gardens will avoid them. And then the final thing I would say there is put as much edible as you can. Like, make sure that anything that you put in is either meant to be edible or will not poison someone, because they may have a go.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Thanks so much, everyone, and thanks, Sandra. That was amazingly interesting. I mean, I'm very biased. I'm interested in gardens, and you came up and had a look at Caledina, but your research, all the different gardens, and just the benefit they can have, and the value add to people's lives, I guess, is just amazing.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you next
Thank you so
time.
much.
Bye. Bye-bye.